Hey, welcome back to the channel. This is Charlie Stevens. Today I want to talk about reading music. So, I couldn't read music for a very long time growing up, and a lot of my favorite players never learned to read either, but I really have benefited quite a bit from learning how, and I really recommend that everybody learns how. Something about having these visual symbols that represent these musical concepts I found very helpful even when I'm not reading. Just being able to kind of imagine what these symbols look like just kind of helps solidify a lot of concepts. So we're going to learn the very basics of reading today, just so you kind of understand how all of that works. And really, the trick to reading is you have to do it a lot, pretty much every day. And you'll just get a little bit better and better at it. So it feels like a pretty daunting task, but it's a pretty important thing if you want to seriously improve your reading skills. But even if you're not trying to go completely serious with it, you really want to understand the basics of how it works. So that's our goal for today. We're just going to learn the very basics of how written music works in standard notation. All right, so when we're reading music, we need to talk about the staff. The staff is a system of lines and spaces, and each line and space represents a different musical pitch. So we have a couple of different clefs that can be drawn on the staff that will kind of change which lines are represented by which pitches. So the most common one is called the treble clef, and that's actually the only one you'll ever need to know if you're a guitar player. There's also the bass clef. Okay, those ones are often joined together to form the grand staff, which has both the treble and the bass clef. Really, piano is the only instrument that's capable of playing both of those at once, but they're worth knowing about. There's also the alto clef, but we're not going to really get into that one. That one's more for if you play viola, you might use that one. But really, we're mainly going to focus on the treble clef, seeing as this channel is mainly focused on guitar, and that's the one we need for that. Okay, so the treble clef, also nicknamed the G clef because it has this big, curly, fancy looking cursive G over here. And that's going to let us know that we're in the treble clef. Okay? So this G kind of centers around the G line. That's one little reason that we can help remember that this specific line represents the note G, because if we look at this cursive G and we look at where it sort of wraps around, we get this sort of crosshairs effect right over the G line there. So that's one of the reasons it's called the G clef. That's how we can remember that. So each line has a letter and each space has a letter. So the bottom line of the treble clef is E, and the second line is G. That's the one we talked about. You can see the treble clef kind of circles around that line. The third line, the one right in the middle, is called B. The one above that is called D, and the top line is F. Okay? So it really goes alphabetical order, but if we're just looking at the lines, we skipped one every time. We call that thirds, from E to G, E, F, G. That's three away, so that's a third. That's another type of interval that we'll do a whole study on in the future. But if we're just looking at the lines, we get thirds. But really, if we put the space in between the lines, it would look like alphabetical order again. So our first lowest line was called E. So that means our lowest space is actually F, because it's the next one in the alphabet. And then we talked about how the second line was G. Well, just past that G line in the next space is an A. And then the next line is B. Just past that B line in that space is C. Next line is D. And just past that line in the top space in between our D line and our F line is a space for E. Okay, so on our lines we have E, G, B, D, F. Often people remember this by saying every good boy does fine. And then in the spaces we have F, A, C, E, which spells out the word face. So I like to remember that by saying space face. So that's how that works. Now notice we don't have any of our accidentals, our sharps or flats. Those will be included with the use of symbols. The symbol for a sharp, which is a hashtag or a pound symbol or a little mini tic-tac-toe board. That's what a sharp is. And for flat, we use a little lowercase b in front of the given note, and that would mean to actually play it a half step lower. That's kind of why we have these names that share letter names, these accidentals. That's why they don't get their own name. They're going to be represented through these use of symbols. Um, okay, so that's how music works. It's sort of a X and Y axis. So the vertical axis basically tells you which pitch you're on, how far up the page the note is, and which line and space it is. That tells you which pitch. The higher you go, the higher the notes sound in frequency. The lower down, the lower they sound. So that's sort of the vertical axis that tells you pitches. Now, the horizontal axis is going to tell you about rhythm and timing and which order to play those notes in. Okay, so to understand that, we actually need to learn how to read some musical symbols, because which line or space we draw a note head, that will tell us what pitch to play, but actually the type of note head that we draw there, that will tell us how long to play it and for the duration. So to understand that, we need to learn how to read rhythm, which we will do in our next lesson. Please join me for that.